A British Royal Navy destroyer operating in the Persian Gulf has just been shadowed by Iranian speedboats in what regional sources are calling one of the most brazen shows of force in these contested waters in years. Not a brief encounter, not a distant observation. According to reports emerging from Iranian military channels, multiple fast attack craft closed to within threatening range of HMS Duncan, a Type 45 destroyer representing some of the most advanced naval technology the United Kingdom possesses. And the Iranian crews made it clear they were tracking every movement that warship made. Welcome to Legal Lens USA. This is David Reynolds, and what you are about to hear reveals how the balance of power in the Persian Gulf has shifted in ways that most Western media outlets are simply not covering with the depth this moment demands. The encounter we are dissecting today exposes vulnerabilities in Western naval operations that defense ministries would prefer remain undiscussed. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the like icon because Legal Lens USA breaks down geopolitical developments before mainstream sources catch up, and we do it in a way that connects the pieces others leave scattered. The Persian Gulf represents one of the most strategically vital waterways on Earth. Roughly 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point connecting the Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the broader Indian Ocean beyond. Control of this waterway means control over energy supplies that power economies across Europe, Asia, and beyond. For decades, Western naval forces, primarily American and British, have maintained what they term freedom of navigation operations in these waters. Destroyers, frigates, and aircraft carriers transit regularly, projecting power and ensuring that shipping lanes remain open according to international maritime law as Washington and London interpret it. HMS Duncan, the vessel at the center of this latest incident, is a Type 45 destroyer, one of 6 such ships forming the backbone of the Royal Navy's air defense capability. Stretching 152 meters in length and displacing over 8,000 tons, these destroyers carry the Sea Viper missile system designed to engage multiple airborne threats simultaneously at ranges exceeding 120 kilometers. The vessels are equipped with the Samson multifunction radar, capable of tracking hundreds of targets while directing defensive interceptors with precision that represents the cutting edge of British naval engineering. These are not minor patrol boats. These are warships built to defend carrier strike groups against sophisticated aerial attack, ships that cost over £1 billion sterling each to construct and maintain. The destroyer was conducting what British defense officials described as routine maritime security operations when the encounter occurred. The specific location remains contested, with Iranian sources placing the incident within waters they claim as territorial seas, while British authorities maintain the vessel operated in international waters consistent with established navigation rights. The distinction matters enormously under international law, but the practical reality is that these waters have become a gray zone where competing sovereignty claims create persistent tension and the potential for miscalculation that could trigger wider conflict. Then, according to Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps naval commanders, multiple fast attack craft launched from coastal bases and moved to intercept the British destroyer. These were not lumbering patrol vessels. These were speedboats capable of exceeding 50 knots, small, maneuverable, and difficult for radar systems optimized for tracking aircraft and missiles to reliably detect and engage, especially in the cluttered radar environment close to shore, where commercial shipping, fishing vessels, and military craft all operate simultaneously. The Iranian crews closed rapidly, reportedly approaching to within several hundred meters of HMS Duncan, close enough that naval officers on the destroyer's bridge could observe the Iranian personnel directly without magnification. Video footage released through Iranian media channels showed the speedboats maintaining parallel course with the British warship, their crews visible on deck. The encounter lasting not seconds or minutes but reportedly continuing for over an hour as the destroyer maintained its transit course. For viewers unfamiliar with the tactical dynamics at play here, understanding why this encounter represents such a significant development requires examining the weapon systems and operational doctrine that define modern asymmetric naval warfare. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates a strategy fundamentally different from traditional blue water naval forces like the Royal Navy or United States Navy. Instead of pursuing destroyer-to-destroyer engagements or carrier strike group operations, the IRGC Navy has invested heavily in what defense analysts term swarming tactics. The concept is deceptively simple, but operationally devastating. Rather than deploying large, expensive warships that present high-value targets, Iran has built hundreds of small, fast attack craft, many armed with anti-ship missiles, heavy machine guns, or rocket-propelled grenades. Individually, these vessels pose manageable threats. Collectively, when operating in coordinated swarms, they create engagement dilemmas that even the most sophisticated Western destroyers struggle to resolve. The speedboats typically measure between 9 and 17 meters in length, constructed using reinforced hulls that minimize radar signature while maximizing speed and maneuverability. Many carry Chinese-designed C-704 anti-ship missiles with ranges exceeding 35 kilometers, weapons capable of inflicting crippling damage on ships the size of HMS Duncan if launched in salvos that saturate defensive systems. The missiles use sea-skimming flight profiles, traveling just meters above the wave tops to avoid detection until the final seconds before impact, compressing the response time available to defensive systems. But the real innovation lies not in the individual weapons, but in the operational concept. Picture a naval engagement where a single British destroyer faces not one or two attackers, but 20, 30, or 50 small, fast attack craft approaching from multiple vectors simultaneously. The Sea Viper missile system aboard HMS Duncan, sophisticated as it is, was designed primarily to engage aircraft and anti-ship missiles at medium to long range. The system can theoretically engage surface targets, but the engagement geometry becomes problematic when those targets operate close to the water, move erratically at high speed, and appear in numbers that exceed the ready magazine capacity. Each Sea Viper interceptor costs roughly £1 million. Each Iranian speedboat costs perhaps $100,000, maybe less. The economic calculation alone reveals the asymmetry. Iran can afford to lose 10 speedboats for every interceptor fired. The United Kingdom cannot afford to expend its entire missile inventory defending against threats that cost a fraction of the defensive response. This is the essential vulnerability that swarming tactics exploit. They force defenders into impossible choices. Engage every threat and exhaust your ammunition while additional waves continue to approach, or selectively engage and accept that some threats will penetrate your defenses and potentially deliver mission-killing or ship-sinking blows. Defense analysts at institutions like the Royal United Services Institute have published extensive studies on this vulnerability. One assessment noted that current Western naval doctrine assumes superiority in engagement ranges, technological sophistication, and individual platform capability. But those advantages diminish rapidly in confined waters like the Persian Gulf, where Iranian forces can mass rapidly, operate close to shore-based support, and exploit terrain that limits the range advantages of advanced radar and missile systems. The encounter with HMS Duncan demonstrates this dynamic in microcosm. Iranian speedboats approached, shadowed, and monitored the destroyer for an extended period, and according to the available reporting, there was nothing the British crew could do to prevent it short of initiating hostilities themselves. According to Iranian military officials speaking to state media outlets including Press TV and Tasnim News Agency, the speedboat crews maintained continuous surveillance of HMS Duncan throughout its transit, transmitting position data and operational details back to shore-based command centers. Iranian defense spokesman characterized the operation as a defensive measure, ensuring that foreign military vessels operating near Iranian territorial waters do not pose threats to national security or violate sovereignty claims. The language employed by Iranian authorities framed the encounter as routine professional maritime monitoring, the kind of activity that any responsible naval force would conduct when foreign warships operate in strategically sensitive waters adjacent to their coastline. Regional media reporting from sources including Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye provided additional context, noting that tensions in the Persian Gulf have escalated significantly following recent Israeli strikes on Iranian facilities and American reinforcement of military presence in the region. The encounter with HMS Duncan did not occur in isolation, but rather as part of a broader pattern where Iranian forces have demonstrated increased willingness to directly challenge Western naval operations that for decades proceeded with minimal interference. But here is where the narrative becomes particularly significant. Validation of Iranian capabilities and operational effectiveness did not come solely from Tehran's propaganda channels. Western defense analysts and maritime security experts have acknowledged, sometimes reluctantly, that Iran has developed genuinely concerning capabilities in anti-access area denial operations within the confined waters of the Persian Gulf. A comprehensive assessment published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies examined Iranian naval modernization and concluded that IRGC naval forces represent a credible threat to Western surface combatants operating in the Gulf, particularly when Iranian forces can exploit geographic advantages and employ swarming tactics against isolated vessels. The report specifically noted that while Western navies maintain overwhelming superiority in open ocean blue water operations, that superiority compresses significantly in the Persian Gulf, where depth, width, and proximity to Iranian shore-based defenses all favor asymmetric Iranian tactics. Even more striking, retired Royal Navy officers with operational experience commanding vessels in the Gulf have publicly acknowledged the challenge that Iranian fast attack craft present. One former destroyer captain, speaking at a maritime security conference, described encounters with IRGC speedboats as among the most tactically complex situations he faced during deployment. He noted that rules of engagement strictly limit options for response unless Iranian forces demonstrate clear hostile intent, but determining hostile intent when speedboats approach rapidly and close to within engagement range creates profound uncertainty. Fire too early and you risk initiating an international incident that escalates into broader conflict. Wait too long and you potentially allow hostile forces to reach launch positions for weapons that travel faster than human reaction time allows for effective defense. Let that assessment sink in for a moment. This is not Iranian propaganda claiming that their speedboats present serious threats to British destroyers. This is a retired Royal Navy officer who commanded vessels in these exact waters, describing the tactical dilemma in terms that validate the essential Iranian operational concept. The speedboats create decision compression that forces Western commanders into reactive postures, where maintaining rules of engagement compliance potentially exposes their vessels to attack they cannot reliably defend against. Drawing an analogy that might resonate with American audiences, imagine a football defense facing an offense that exclusively runs quick-hitting plays designed to stress decision-making before the defense can properly set. The defensive players may be individually superior athletes, but if the offense can compress their reaction time and force decisions before proper positioning occurs, individual superiority becomes less decisive. Iranian speedboat tactics function similarly. They compress decision timelines, force British and American commanders to operate under rules that constrain their responses, and exploit the hesitation that inevitably results when personnel understand that an incorrect judgment could trigger international crisis. What does this encounter mean strategically, and why should audiences beyond naval warfare specialists care about speedboats shadowing a British destroyer in waters most people could not locate on an unmarked map? The answer unfolds across multiple dimensions that ultimately affect global energy markets, regional stability, and the credibility of Western security commitments that underpin defense relationships across the Middle East and beyond. Begin with the most immediate implication. If Iranian forces can approach and shadow British destroyers with impunity, openly monitoring their movements and demonstrating the capability to mass forces in threatening proximity, then the entire premise of freedom of navigation operations comes into question. Those operations rest on the assumption that Western naval forces can transit international waters without interference, and that any attempt to impede that transit will be met with overwhelming force that makes interference prohibitively costly. But if Iranian speedboats can shadow British destroyers, collecting intelligence on their capabilities, operational patterns, and potential vulnerabilities, and do so without triggering military response, then the deterrent effect of those destroyers diminishes substantially. The message that encounter sends to regional actors is that Western naval presence, however technologically sophisticated, does not translate automatically into control, or even assured freedom of movement in waters where local forces can exploit geographic and tactical advantages. Now extend that implication to the broader question of energy security and freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Approximately 18 to 20 million barrels of oil transit through that strait every single day. Closure of the strait, even temporarily, would send shockwaves through global energy markets, spiking prices, disrupting supply chains, and creating economic consequences that would reverberate far beyond the Middle East. Western governments have consistently maintained that the strait will remain open, and that any attempt to close it would be met with immediate military action to restore access. That commitment represents a cornerstone of Western security policy in the region, a red line that Iran has tested repeatedly but never definitively crossed. Yet if Iranian forces can demonstrate the capability to mass speedboats, approach Western naval vessels, and shadow their movements without triggering military escalation, the implicit question becomes what happens if Iran decides to transition from shadowing to actual interference with commercial shipping. The tactical dynamics demonstrated in the HMS Duncan encounter suggest that preventing such interference would require Western forces to either dramatically expand their naval presence, accepting casualties that would inevitably result from engaging swarms of Iranian speedboats, or accept a level of Iranian influence over transit through the strait that fundamentally alters the regional power balance. Consider also the implications for American military posture in the Gulf. The United States maintains extensive naval presence, including carrier strike groups, that periodically deploy to the region specifically to deter Iranian aggression and reassure Gulf state allies that American security commitments remain credible. But American destroyers and cruisers face the same tactical dilemmas that HMS Duncan encountered. They possess overwhelming firepower and technological sophistication, but in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf, those advantages compress when facing swarms of small, fast attack craft operating close to shore. The encounter between Iranian speedboats and a British destroyer highlights vulnerabilities that apply equally to American vessels, and regional allies from Saudi Arabia to the United Arab Emirates are undoubtedly drawing conclusions about what Western naval dominance actually means in practical operational terms when local forces can challenge that dominance using asymmetric tactics that exploit geographic advantages. For those allies, the credibility of American security commitments depends not on abstract technological superiority, but on demonstrated ability to maintain freedom of operation in the actual geographic and tactical environment where conflicts would occur. If that ability appears constrained, alliance relationships begin to fray, and regional actors start hedging their security relationships in ways that benefit Iranian strategic objectives. The economic dimension extends beyond immediate energy security concerns to the costs of maintaining credible deterrence in an environment where Iranian forces have demonstrated effective asymmetric capabilities. Every British or American warship operating in the Persian Gulf now does so with enhanced awareness that Iranian speedboats can approach, shadow, and potentially threaten them in ways that traditional naval doctrine struggles to address. Maintaining security presence under those conditions requires either accepting elevated risk or investing in additional defensive capabilities, increased ship numbers, or modified operational patterns that all impose costs. Britain's Royal Navy already operates under severe budget constraints, with a surface combatant fleet that has shrunk dramatically over recent decades. Dedicating additional resources to Persian Gulf operations means reducing presence elsewhere, or accepting capability gaps that create vulnerabilities in other theaters. The economic burden of sustaining credible deterrence increases when adversaries develop capabilities that impose asymmetric costs, forcing Western navies to invest billions in countermeasures against threats that cost adversaries millions to deploy. According to British Ministry of Defence statements released following the encounter, HMS Duncan conducted its operations in full accordance with international maritime law and at no point deviated from its planned transit route. Defense officials emphasized that the Royal Navy maintains the right to operate in international waters and that routine encounters with Iranian naval forces, while noted and monitored, do not alter British commitment to freedom of navigation. The statement characterized the incident as a professional interaction where both sides maintained communications protocols and no unsafe actions occurred. A ministry spokesman told reporters that the Royal Navy has extensive experience operating in the Persian Gulf and that commanding officers receive comprehensive training in managing encounters with Iranian forces, including fast attack craft. The official narrative presented the encounter as routine, unremarkable, and handled appropriately by HMS Duncan's crew according to established procedures and rules of engagement. United States Central Command, which coordinates American military operations across the Middle East, also issued comments noting that American forces maintain close coordination with British allies and that the freedom of navigation through international waters remains a core commitment that both nations will continue to uphold regardless of attempts at intimidation or interference. The conflicting narratives, Iranian officials describing a successful surveillance operation that gathered valuable intelligence on British destroyer capabilities and vulnerabilities, while British and American authorities characterized the encounter as routine interaction handled professionally without incident, create the familiar pattern where competing strategic messaging obscures objective assessment of tactical realities. For many observers familiar with the dynamics of information operations surrounding military encounters, the mere fact that Iranian speedboats approached to within several hundred meters of a British destroyer and maintained that proximity for over an hour represents a strategic messaging victory, regardless of how official spokespersons subsequently frame the incident. The images and video footage of Iranian fast attack craft shadowing HMS Duncan circulate through regional media and social networks, visually demonstrating Iranian willingness and capability to challenge Western naval presence in ways that verbal reassurances from defense ministries cannot easily counter. Whether the encounter technically violated international law or whether it remained within the boundaries of legitimate maritime activity becomes secondary to the perception that Iranian forces operated with confidence close to a major British warship and the destroyer took no action to prevent that approach or terminate the encounter. Where does this leave the broader question of Western naval strategy in the Persian Gulf and the credibility of security commitments that depend on maintaining freedom of operation in these contested waters? It leaves military planners confronting tactical realities that do not easily align with strategic commitments. Iranian speedboat tactics have evolved from theoretical threat to demonstrated operational capability, tested repeatedly against Western naval vessels without triggering the kind of overwhelming response that traditional deterrence theory would predict. The encounter with HMS Duncan represents one data point in a broader pattern where Iranian forces probe, test, and challenge Western naval operations, gathering intelligence on defensive capabilities, operational patterns, and decision-making under pressure. Each encounter provides Iranian commanders additional information about how British and American vessels respond, what rules of engagement constrain their actions, and where vulnerabilities exist that could be exploited in actual combat scenarios. The tactical initiative in these encounters lies with Iranian forces who choose when and where to approach, how close to push before disengaging, and how to calibrate their actions to remain below the threshold that would trigger military response while still achieving intelligence gathering and strategic messaging objectives. This represents a fundamental asymmetry in how deterrence operates in confined waters against adversaries employing swarming tactics optimized for the specific geographic environment. Western naval dominance built on technological superiority, individual platform capability, and training excellence remains real and significant in open ocean blue water operations. But in the Persian Gulf, those advantages compress, and the tactical dynamics shift toward forces that can mass rapidly, exploit terrain, and employ weapons and tactics specifically designed to stress Western defensive systems. The question facing British and American defense planners is whether current naval posture adequately addresses these tactical realities or whether maintaining credible deterrence requires fundamental changes in force structure, operational doctrine, or willingness to accept casualties in defending freedom of navigation commitments. The encounter between Iranian speedboats and HMS Duncan highlights that question without providing easy answers, and the strategic implications will continue to ripple through defense planning and regional security calculations, regardless of how official spokespersons frame the incident. So where does all of this analysis leave audiences trying to understand what a seemingly minor encounter between speedboats and a destroyer means for regional stability, energy security, and the broader balance of power in the Middle East? It leaves us recognizing that the dynamics of naval warfare in the Persian Gulf have evolved in ways that challenge traditional assumptions about Western naval dominance. Iranian forces have developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the geographic constraints and tactical environment of these waters, and they have demonstrated willingness to employ those tactics against British and American vessels in ways that previous generations of Iranian naval commanders would have avoided. The speedboats that shadowed HMS Duncan represent not just individual vessels, but an entire operational concept that defense analysts across Western militaries are still working to effectively counter. This is a story that extends beyond one encounter to the question of whether current Western naval strategy remains adequate for the threats and tactical realities that characterize this region. Legal Lens USA will continue monitoring developments as they unfold, because understanding these dynamics matters for anyone concerned about energy security, regional stability, or the credibility of Western security commitments in an era where asymmetric tactics increasingly challenge conventional military superiority. If this analysis helped you understand what is actually happening beneath the surface of routine military encounters, that mainstream sources cover with minimal depth. Hit that like button right now and share this video with someone who needs this perspective. Drop a comment below because your insights add value to this community. Do you think Western navies have effective answers to Iranian speedboat swarm tactics, or does the tactical advantage lie with local forces who can exploit geography and asymmetric capabilities? Let us know what you think because these conversations matter, and your perspective adds depth to our collective understanding. This is what one encounter in the Persian Gulf reveals about shifting tactical dynamics and strategic vulnerabilities. The world, every defense ministry, every naval planner is absorbing what these developments mean for the future of maritime security in one of the most strategically vital waterways on Earth. The answers remain uncertain, the response is still under development, but the questions have been asked clearly through speedboats shadowing a British destroyer in contested waters where the balance of power continues to shift in ways that demand serious analysis.